Wow, thanks so much for coming out. I want to thank everybody. What a crowd tonight. All we're missing is concessions like cotton candy and coffee and all that kind of thing. Well, I want to thank you all for coming, and I want to thank all the people who helped make this happen. A lot of them are unheralded because they never show up on stage. For years, Michael Medved and I have urged KTTH events because of you asking for them. And Jason Entebbe, our KTTH program director, really took up that initiative and made it all happen. That's Jason right there walking down. Give him a hand. I also want to thank Jeanette Warren, head of KTTH Promotions, but she's hiding in the back, but she can hear you applaud if you want to do so. I'd also like to recognize my producer, Nicole Thompson, who keeps me organized so that I remember to actually show up here. And there you go. She's hiding right over there. And my former producer, Chris Martin, who is now Ben Shapiro's producer, and he does much the same for him every day. Where's Chris Martin? He's hiding somewhere in there. There he is, right there. Okay, for the objective of tonight is to have an interesting debate, a compelling debate, a civil debate, but that doesn't mean a boring debate. So at times things might get heated, and that's okay because we're going to prove that you can disagree and still be civil about it. That's right. I think I just heard an amen out there. I want to go through a list here. In Boise, Idaho, the Intermountain Fair Housing Council sued a Christian homeless shelter for, in their opinion, violating the Federal Fair Housing Act because the shelter emphasized Christian religious values. In Boston, San Francisco, Illinois, and Washington, D.C., Catholic adoption agencies have been closed down for their unwillingness to place children with same-sex couples because it violates their convictions. And a U.S. District Court in California deemed, quote, religious speech expressing disapproval of homosexual acts as an infringement on the rights of other students. In Newark, 2 Sunni Muslim police officers were refused an exemption on religious grounds to keep their beards as their faith dictates, even though exemptions to the rule were granted to other officers on non-religious grounds. In England, a Christian couple with an exemplary record of fostering children were denied a foster parenting license because the judge ruled that it was in the state's interest to protect children from being, quote, infected, unquote, by Judeo-Christian values on sexual morality. Are these things indications that religious liberty is fading, that there's a growing intolerance of people of faith and an increasing compulsion by the secular culture to enforce conformity? Or might some of the cultural changes we see actually be expansions of religious liberty, and we're actually poised for a new golden era? Tonight will be a debate on the nature of religious liberty, its strengths, benefits, definitions, and limitations. We'll examine what constitutes religious oppression of an individual and how far into the public sphere religious influence should go. Please welcome our guest. Guest number 1, Dr. James Wellman, Associate Professor of the Jackson School of International Studies at the University of Washington. And your cultural crusader, Michael Medved. Dr. Valerie Tirico, psychologist and Huffington Post religious columnist. Reverend Dr. Monica Corsaro of the Seattle United Methodist Church. And from 3 to 6 p.m., Battle Ben Shapiro. Please be seated, panelists. I do want to say a special expression of gratitude to our more left-leaning guests because it's always braver to come when you know the audience is generally tilted against you. So we do appreciate your attendance here. That's what I love about conservatives. I didn't even have to say it. You know, you knew instinctively. Time to clap. I like that. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to pose some general questions. We're going to start on some philosophical grounds, and then we're going to move to specific examples where individuals have asserted their religious liberty have been violated in recent news events. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw out a question. It's going to be generally informal, so I'm not going to call on, most of the time I won't call on a specific individual. I'll toss it out there. Panelists who feel extra eager can snag it and start talking about it, and we'll just go back and forth, and then I'll have some follow-ups on that. So that's the general format of the day. Toward the end, I'll start incorporating some of the questions that I've received from you, the audience. So let's begin. Before we get into detail, let's get an overview of where you stand, where each of you stands. We've been playing a promo where Ted Cruz said that religious liberties are in greater danger now than they have ever been. Do you agree with that, and why? Somebody's got to be eager.
I think it depends on what country you're in. If we're talking about the United States, I would say our religious liberties are fairly secure. I think one of the things that's bothering conservatives is that secularists, that is, and atheists are growing in our population. They're up to 15 to 17% of our population, and very much growing among the younger generation. And they're beginning, I think they've been doing this for a while, but they're beginning to say, hey, we should have a voice in the public sphere. And traditionally, for the most part, Americans have been sort of non-denominational Christians up until at least the 1950s. And I think there's a way in which we're not used to that sort of competition. And so for the first time, I think there's real competition in the public square. And I think it's fascinating, and you see that at the University of Washington, where 30-40% of my students are not religious at all. So it's a very, we live in interesting times. Michael and I were talking about that. It's a good thing to live in interesting times. So I would say no. You're probably disappointed.
I thought that was a Chinese curse, to live in interesting times.
It is. I would, by the way, I think it's great that Professor Wellman rightly said depends on what country you're in. Religious liberties are in assault all over the world, and not so much in the United States. Certainly when you compare what is going on in China or what is going on in Nigeria, where, which is unbelievable. We are so saturated with horrible news, and much of it either aimed against religion or perpetrated in the name of some religion, and usually one particular religion. We've become numb to it. But here in the United States, I just want to take issue with one thing that you said, James, which is that those numbers that people use all the time, where they say that 15% to 17% are secular, that's 15% or 17% who are unaffiliated. There's a difference between being unchurched and being secular. And if you actually ask those people and you break down all these surveys, the majority of those people say they pray regularly. They don't do it in church. Actually, one of the things, one of my favorite numbers is American Atheists just was thrilled because they found a survey that said there were 6% of Americans who describe themselves as atheist or agnostic. A third of the atheists or agnostics say they pray every day. So I don't know to whom they pray or to what they pray, but they do. I think that the depth of religious feeling in the United States is much greater than is indicated by surveys indicating church or synagogue or mosque membership.
Well, because it's an event about religion, somebody's going to have to preach the apocalypse. So here we go. Yes, my feeling is that religious liberty is under a definite and growing assault in the United States. And when I say religious liberty is under assault, I don't mean just in terms of people disagreeing. That's not a violation of liberty. That's the exercise of liberty. I'm talking about the intervention of government and the use of government as a weapon against people's religious, not only beliefs, but against people's religious activities. And we're seeing that in terms of discrimination against businesses that don't wish to service particular events that they feel are sinful. We're seeing it with regard to a newfound moral superiority in government that suggests that it can trump the religious beliefs and precepts of an enormous number of people. Honestly, the Hobby Lobby decision is going to come down on Monday, and I'm sure we'll talk about this in a little bit, but I am befuddled and bewildered and dismayed that we have now become a country where we're all supposed to sit around on Monday and wait for the 9 wisest and most moral among us to descend in their robes and inform us to what extent we're allowed to worship God in our business lives. This is what the threat, I believe, is, and I think that the threat is quite deep. I think what we're going to watch in the next 2 years, to make another apocalyptic prediction, I think what we're going to watch in the next 2 years is states like Washington try to withdraw the nonprofit status of various churches that refuse to perform same-sex marriages. Once those nonprofit status, under the guise of the Bob Jones University decision from the 1980s, and then they will attempt to remove any business license from churches that refuse to perform same-sex marriages. And this will be a tremendous crackdown on religious freedom in America. This is what the battle has become. Not a battle about whether 2 dudes or 2 ladies can get married, but a battle about whether your religious institution can function as it sees fit in the public square.
Let me do a follow-up here.
Hold on. First of all, I didn't know Orthodox believed in the apocalypse, so you're going to have to help me on that one. And then, second of all, I just want to be able to speak about gay marriage in Washington State and how that law works. The beautiful thing about Washington State is we're spiritual, not religious. So the majority of people here are not church-going people, or mosque-going people, or synagogue-going people, and boy, we sure wish that would change. So we better start teaching our people some Bible and telling them how revolutionary it truly is. But in the meantime, the way that the marriage law works here in the state of Washington, because the state of Washington does believe in religious freedom, no religious organization has to perform a service. Now, that really works out in my United Methodist denomination because right now, officially, the United Methodist denomination does not support gay marriage. But I stand outside of that and I do marry gay couples because I can in the state of Washington. So that's where it's all at. You don't have to if you don't want to, or you can break your church law and honor your state law. There's no
Can I?
going in on your freedom.
You actually brought up an interesting point about Washington State, and I wanted to do a follow-up and general philosophical follow-up. Do religious liberties matter as much in unchurched Washington as they might in a Bible Belt state?
What, I don't get to answer the first question?
No, you can. We're just adding to the conversation. The way it works is we've thrown things
You're just
out.
going to have to do a complex sentence.
That's right. Or don't be so shy. Grab that microphone, and when somebody's done, think of it like a dinner table conversation with a lot of aggressive people. So you either speak up or you miss out.
Jewish Thanksgiving.
Now's your chance
Jewish or
again.
Italian dinner.
We'll
So
start
there
with you. You go ahead and you can answer that and the other if you wish.
Fair enough. Actually, in order for me to answer even that first question, I need to read something from somebody who isn't here tonight. So I'm going to unfold this piece of paper, and you shouldn't panic because it's actually written really big because I'm old.
In radio terms, there's nothing we love more than when people pull out a piece of paper to read
I'm
from it.
sure. Well, I mean, hostility, right?
Go ahead.
So there's nothing to lose, as you guys pointed out. In 1878, there was a case that came before the Supreme Court of the United States that had to do with religious liberty, and it centered on the right of Mormons to engage in polygamous marriages. And I want to read, what I want to read is a comment from then Chief Justice Morrison Waite. He was the 7th Chief Justice of the United States. And in his comment, Waite quotes Thomas Jefferson, and then he makes his own comment, and then I would like to add my comment presumptuously in terms of why I think the solutions that they propose have not caused these problems to go away. So Waite says, Mr. Jefferson, in reply to an address to him by a committee of the Danbury Baptist Association, took occasion to say, believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other for his faith or worship, that the legislative powers of the government reach actions only and not opinions. I contemplate with sovereign reverence that the act of the whole American people, which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state, adhering to this expression of the supreme will of the nation in behalf of the rights of conscience, I shall see with sincere satisfaction the progress of those sentiments which tend to restore man to all his natural rights, convinced he has no natural right in opposition to his social duties. So that was Jefferson's statement, and then Waite added this comment. Coming as this does from an acknowledged leader of the advocates of the measure, meaning the First Amendment, it may be accepted almost as an authoritative declaration of the scope and effect of the amendment. Congress was deprived of all legislative power over mere opinion, but was left free to reach actions which were in violation of social duties or subversive of good order. So I'm a psychologist, and the reason that I think that that proposed resolution, the resolution that that Jefferson suggested, that Waite reiterated, doesn't resolve the problem, and the reason that we're all sitting here today is because, as a psychologist, I believe that beliefs dictate action, and that it is impossible to create a solution to this question of religious freedom that simply secures, as Jefferson did, as he says the First Amendment did, freedom of opinion. I said beliefs dictate behavior. If you came to my front door and I believe from the depth of my being to the depth that people hold their religious beliefs that you are there to rape and murder my daughter, I am going to shoot you. And that...
Of course we're going to applaud that.
They love guns.
So no Michael Dukakis moment here. Nothing.
So I think, as a psychologist and as a former evangelical Christian, that beliefs dictate behavior in an incredibly powerful way, and that religion dictates behaviors that are fundamentally incompatible with each other. And so there is no way for us to get around the fact that affording certain religious liberties to one person inhibits the religious liberties of other people, and affording certain religious liberties to institutions limits the religious liberties of individuals to some extent.
Can I just ask you very specifically on the case that you read, because it's very provocative. I mean, we all know that the LDS Church changed its position on plural marriage in 1890. This is a case from 1878. Do you think that this case was rightly adjudicated, or do you think it was wrongly adjudicated? The case determined that the federal government had the power to invalidate plural marriage, that the government had the right to tell Mormons at the time that, no, we will not accept your definition of marriage. Do you think that that case was rightly decided, or did they show disrespect to the religious liberties of the LDS Church at the time?
That's a great question.
Well, they made the decision and then they gave them Utah, right? I mean,
they built Utah. They didn't give it to them.
Right?
God gave them Utah.
Because we in Illinois wanted them out. I mean, you both are getting to the point of everything. I think the point you're making is everything is not getting handled in the courts, and then we end up doing our behaviors. we end up working. There is plural marriage in the Mormon Church. It's not the official stance of the LDS, but there's plural marriage, and it's going on in Utah. So
those are breakaway groups that are. By the way, just to be fair, just to be fair, let's be very clear. The Mormon Church will excommunicate people who advocate for or practice plural marriage. It is not acceptable Mormon doctrine today.
The question was about the past. The question was about the past.
Well, the question is, do you believe that people who think that they have, God tells them that they want to have multiple wives like King Solomon did, do they have a right to go ahead and compel the state to recognize those marriages?
But the state didn't. The state
didn't and doesn't.
Yes.
Not yet.
Yes, they did, and the state said no. So yes. Next.
No, it's actually the reason, and Michael, I assume the reason you're asking, I mean, it's a very important question because it really does go to, I think, your point, which is this court decision it's a case that proves too much. The argument that's being made in the case is that basically the state can encroach on any religious behavior whatsoever so long as it doesn't encroach on religious opinion. And that's the problem with the case in and of itself. And I think that the point that you're making, Michael, is that people who use this case as a case against the exercise of religious freedom in the public square in terms of action are the same people, in large part, who are saying that the state has no right to regulate, for example, gay marriage, which is a completely illogical position. So you have to believe that either the state has to make provision and make room for religious liberty in exercise, or you have to believe that the state has the power to basically compel whatever behavior it seeks so long as it doesn't affect opinion.
Okay. Now, I think we've made everything clear here. Let me assure you that the issue of same-sex marriage is going to return. So we will be able to readdress anything left unsaid. Also, I think the question about whether or not religious liberties matter as much in unchurched Washington as they might in a Bible Belt state was answered indirectly by that. So let me do a follow-up on a separate issue here. Even those who advocate for religious liberty speak of the need to uphold religious rights, and they usually use a phrase, especially for those who have deeply held convictions. Yet, when it comes to other First Amendment rights, such as the freedom of speech, we don't argue that those rights are essential for those who deeply believe what they say, but those rights are disposable for everybody else. Is deeply held an essential consideration, and should it be a consideration at all when it comes to dealing with religious liberties?
No, I mean, that's an extraordinarily dangerous business. The minute that you have the government deciding whose beliefs are deeply held versus what is not deeply held, I mean, that literally is the thought police. I mean, that is the government deciding what's in your head and then guaranteeing you certain rights based on what's in your head. And the bottom line to this entire discussion is really, does the government have the power to regulate your religious behavior if the government feels that it violates its morality? That's really the central conflict that we're talking about here. And the problem is that as the government decides that it can regulate particular behaviors, and this is the point that I was making at the very beginning, as the government decides it can regulate particular behaviors, the sphere of religious liberty is going to shrink to exactly what Chief Justice Waite said there. It's going to shrink smaller and smaller and smaller until the only thing that you can do, religiously speaking, is think about your religion and maybe pray in your own home.
Well, so you're attributing that to Waite, but it's what Thomas Jefferson said, and I say that not because Thomas Jefferson wasn't in fact a deity, but to call attention to the fact that this conversation goes way back in America's history. We have struggled with it for an incredibly long time, and if you look, for example, at this opinion, what Waite did say is he talks about the government being able to regulate behavior that is relevant to social duties and order.
Which is a malleable term, and this is why I think both Jefferson and Waite are wrong.
Let me just break in. I think you're being slightly paranoid. I don't know who you're talking about. In America, you can change your religion. You can have no religion. You can. Do they smoke peyote? You can smoke peyote as a religious right. For goodness sakes, man. Move to Egypt.
But I can't open a flower shop, can I?
Move to Pakistan. Move to Saudi Arabia. Then you can complain. And I, for one, think America is a fantastic country. And you know, as a liberal, right, that's what you say about me.
No, I think you're a leftist.
And most liberals are self-hating Americans, right? I love America, and I teach American religion. and I will stand up for what we have built.
But you'll shut down my business if I don't serve a cake to a gay
great
couple.
culture with great religious liberty.
But you will shut down my business if I don't serve a cake to a gay wedding.
Pardon me?
But you'll shut down my business if I don't serve a cake to a gay wedding.
I can assure you we'll be getting to shutting down businesses
Give me an example.
as a result.
Give me an example.
I'll give you an example of
That
later.
example. That exact example.
Just a second. We will have those some examples coming up. But follow up, Dr. Wellman, you just said Ben shouldn't complain because we're not Egypt or Saudi Arabia. Wouldn't it be a good
doggone
idea?
right.
Wouldn't it be a good idea to, in the preservation of liberty, to have a heated debate about the nature of those rights? Because the same argument could be made for any given homosexual couple or any given far-left couple or many other, or any non-Muslim faith in the United States, that they don't live in Egypt or Saudi Arabia either, so therefore they shouldn't complain.
Well, you know, all right. Yeah, but I don't think we have...
I thought that liberals were the complainers.
Pardon me?
I thought liberals were the complainers in this country.
I don't know. Dr. Wellman brought up the idea that Ben shouldn't speak out because...
No, you know, I love the fact that Ben is controversial, and he does well because he is controversial. That's why we like to hear him. But let's get to the facts a little bit. You know, religious rights and religious liberties are not being compacted in America. You know, but let me go back to what Michael asked.
What, can you answer the example that I gave earlier?
The case of polygamy. I think that was wrongly decided.
You think so? You actually agree with me that a shop should be allowed to reject service to a gay wedding?
I think it's an interesting question. Is it a
Why is that an
public?
interesting
No,
question? Why isn't that
wait.
clear-cut?
You like to interrupt. It's a public for-profit business. And I think there is non-discrimination should go on there, and they should not be allowed to discriminate against gay people.
So in other words,
yes, I agree with that.
Gentlemen,
Yeah.
wait. Hold
Yeah.
the thought. I assure you, we will have a specific example that we'll be getting to later on that, so I'm drawing the line. Save those thoughts for later. And as a follow-up to
tucked in there, baby.
Valerie, I assure you, as a self-professed whiner, conservatives do a lot of complaining too, believe me. All right. In the Hobby Lobby case, which is expected to be handed down from the Supreme Court on Monday, the Obama administration seeks to enforce an ACA, the Affordable Care Act mandate, that would compel owners, Barbara and David Green, to provide certain kinds of what they consider to be abortifacient birth control. Is the Obama administration infringing on the rights of these business owners? Hold it. Valerie, would you like to launch us off on that?
I'd love to, because our system of jurisprudence for going way back, back to the constitutional days, in fact, differentiates organizations that come together for the purpose of worship and religious affiliation and religious indoctrination from other kinds of corporate bodies. And so, I mean, essentially, what we're looking at now is individuals and corporations, for-profit corporations, claiming the rights that have been secured for religious congregations. The special rights that are given to religious congregations are recognition of the fact that you can't practice worship unless people are able to come together in community to do that. That's very different than getting to impose your religious values on your employees. And I would argue that it's impossible to have civil society if you give people the right to impose their religious beliefs on their societies. Christianity has fragmented into 32,000 different denominations at the last time I checked, and each of them has a different set of moral priorities and a different understanding of God's will. So if you start giving those people the right to impose their version on other people, I don't know where that stops. We end up, any way you look at it, having to make hard decisions that trade off the rights and liberties of individuals against one another.
I'm very troubled by something that you just seem to have said, and I want to make sure that I'm understanding you correctly. Because Are you suggesting that religious liberty is not a personal, individual right? It is only a corporate right for religious organizations?
No.
Do I have a personal right?
As do all the women employees of Hobby Lobby. They also have a personal right to practice their autonomy, to get their health care, maternal health care.
Where is there a right guaranteed in the Constitution to get their health care? I'm
We're
sorry.
not talking constitutional.
Yes, we are. We are talking about the right to free exercise of religion.
You asked her about religion practice, and
correct.
And
no,
does the
I'm asking her.
supersede the person?
No, that,
and I'm
that,
going to answer for her.
No, let me make clear what my question is, Monica, please. My question is very simple. When the Constitution speaks of free exercise of religion,
It's
are
an
they
individual
only
right.
granting that as free exercise for an organization, or is that for an individual too?
I would argue that it is, in fact, only for individuals, and the right to assembly for religious purposes is an extension of the rights of individuals.
Okay, so hold on for a moment. Let me just
the rights of institutions have never, religious institutions have never been threatened. That wasn't what
Valerie,
the Inquisition was about.
If I can, if you're saying this only has to do with the right to assemble for religious institutions, what if it is a single privately owned business? It's a family business.
Oh, you keep wanting, everyone wants to go back to that, don't they?
No.
Right?
I mean, in other words, because that's what you're talking about. You're talking about corporate rights versus religious rights. I'm talking about the rights of individuals to fulfill their conscience.
And they go to church, they go to synagogue,
but
they go to temple,
Can I make it very, very clear? The Constitution does not guarantee a right to freedom of worship. It guarantees a right to freedom of religion, and that's very different.
The Constitution guarantees a right to freedom of religious opinion. That's what we just heard. The rest of
Free
this conversation is more complex than that.
And Hobby Lobby is not a church.
Hobby Lobby has 500 employees. It's an enormous organization that is for
okay. So
profit.
if it were an individually owned business,
500 stores.
I have a little business. I have my family, and we have 2 employees. Okay, one of whom is here. And plus my wife. But do I have the rights to, with my little tiny business, because I'm an individual, and I believe everyone agrees that there is such a right as individual liberty to religion, to practice religion, to free exercise of religion, do I then have the right to extend my free exercise of religion to my small, individually, totally owned family business?
Let me ask you a question. As an employee with an earned benefit, which is health insurance that happens to get routed through my employer because that's how we structure it in this country, do I have a right to use my health insurance to decide to the best of my own spiritual and religious values when and whether to bring a child into this world?
Sure. You have a right to get any insurance you want. All that Hobby Lobby is insisting is that they not be forced to pay for insurance they do not choose to pay for. There's nothing preventing someone from getting health insurance that covers abortions or abortifacients or anything else.
And this is sort of the point, I think, is that when you look at, the word imposition is being thrown around a lot. Imposition. That people are imposing their beliefs on others. There's only one group in this country that is using the government to impose their beliefs on others at the point of a gun, and that is not Hobby Lobby. Hobby Lobby is involved in a consensual relationship between the employer and the employee. Churches are involved in consensual relationships between themselves and their constituents. The government is not involved in a consensual relationship when it tells a business that it will revoke its license, and it will come to their front door if they remain open, and it will forcibly shut down their business. There's only one person and one group that is coming to the party here with a gun. And the only group, I mean, you said conservatives love guns. Liberals love guns far more. They just love guns that are being used by the government against conservatives.
Dr. Wellman, let me add something to the conversation because it's very much related.
Can I get in?
Absolutely, but it's related, so you'll be able to jump in right afterward, no problem. The Little Sisters of the Poor, a religious order of women devoted to caring for needy elderly people, now face the possibility of millions of dollars in fines unless they give in a similar situation unless they provide for their employees free coverage for sterilization, contraception, and what they see as abortion-inducing drugs. Should government be able to compel these women to act in violation of their convictions?
Is this the Hobby Lobby case? Or?
Well, there's Hobby Lobby as well, and I'm adding the Little Sisters to
let me go back to Hobby
the
Lobby.
to the mix.
I think we're making a mountain out of a molehill. Okay, bear with me. So there's, I think, 25 types of contraception that this insurance covers. And I believe in the case, there's 4 that are problematic for Hobby Lobby. This could be simply dealt with and solved with the government simply saying, yeah, we understand. We'll pay for those 4. Solved. Okay, so let's just get over ourselves. I mean, come on. And if they don't do that, they're dumb.
They're dumb.
Yeah.
They haven't done that. By the way, I don't think, Ben, that's a perfectly, in other words, for people, rather than suing Hobby Lobby and compelling them to pay for the abortofacients, if President Obama wanted to say, I'm going to go to the House of Representatives and see if we can get an appropriation so we will pay for it.
No, I agree.
It wouldn't work, but he could try.
So I want to come back to the Hobby Lobby case too, because I think it beautifully illustrates the point I was making earlier about trade-offs between people's deeply held religious values. And because I think ultimately in that case, the question you have to ask is, which is a more core spiritual value? Being able to make your own decisions in consultation with yourself, your clergy, and your God, if you believe in God, at the beginnings and ends of life, or being able to decide to try and impose your religious beliefs to constrain the behavior of your employees, because that's what they're trying to do. If their employees all agreed with them, if their employees all thought that God's will was the same thing that the owners of Hobby Lobby think God's will is, there wouldn't be an issue here, would they? Because they could give the insurance, whatever insurance, and they could rest assured that their employees would choose like they would.
The question in Hobby Lobby is whose freedom is being infringed upon. Employees' freedom is not infringed upon when they enter into a consensual relationship with an employer that includes certain types of health care.
Not consensual.
Of
There's
course
a
it is. They
power
can quit.
difference.
Who is forcing them? Where is the gun?
Huh?
Where is the gun? Who is forcing them? Where is the chain? Who is locking them to their
Stop
desk?
with the gun language.
Health
No,
ins-
th-
health
but, no,
ins-
but this is the reason that I use the gun language is because it is vitally important for people to understand that every government measure at the end of the day it must be compelled by force. That's what government measures are for. There is a vast difference, a huge difference in terms of personal liberty and freedom between the government compelling behavior and a company saying that we are not going to provide certain types of coverage, and if you don't like that, you can quit or buy your own coverage. There's a vast difference. The gun's the whole issue.
Health insurance is an earned benefit. It's not given for free to employees, they earn it. Should your employer be able to decide how you spend your money?
It is,
Hold up.
hold on. One second. Earned from whom? Okay, I may think that I earn twice the salary that I get from this radio station. That doesn't mean that I have an earned benefit from the radio station for twice what they're willing to pay me. It's always a consensual
You
relationship.
pay for your health care.
Well, first of all, I do because it was negotiated in the contract that I signed, in which I voluntarily engaged. And if I don't like that, I can quit tomorrow.
I think...
And let me say,
Michael, let me just introduce a third case. They're all related. It'll be just fine. There's a similar case still in the courts from Washington State where the State Pharmacy Board, after initially allowing for religious exemptions, came under pressure from former Governor Gregoire to mandate that pharmacies and pharmacists provide Plan B regardless of religious convictions. That act was widely seen as targeting Ralph's Thriftway in Olympia and its owner, Kevin Stormans. 2 individual pharmacists also felt that providing Plan B would violate their religious freedoms. They're also involved in the suit. Was the State Pharmacy Board correct in trying to compel Ralph's Pharmacy, despite the fact that there were multiple pharmacies within a short time that were offering the same thing, or the thing that was requested, Plan B?
obviously, it's outrageous. And so much of this is outrageous. And I want to go back to a point that Ben has made, and has made so wonderfully forcefully, which is you're literally talking about force here. And to bring up yet another case that we've all touched upon, Arnett's Flowers, the Attorney General of the state of Washington, the Honorable Bob Ferguson, has agreed that ultimately, if there is a refusal to acknowledge and pay fines and to make up for the fact that she chooses not to provide flowers for a wedding that she doesn't want to work for, that she could go to jail. That's force. My wife and I, my wife is here, and we're planning the wedding of our son on August 31st. Actually, that's true. That's true. I'll cop to that. But I'm signing a whole lot of checks. And in any event, so I cannot imagine that we would want to compel a florist who didn't want to service our particular wedding. It seems to me that this is an area, honestly, and I know James and Monica and Valerie, you're all people of conscience. I mean, surely you must see the injustice and the threat to religious liberty in this. Especially when this is not denying people the right to marry. They have the right to marry in Washington State. She even provided a list of other florists who she knew would be happy to serve them. She was not discriminating against gay people. She had served these two people as individual clients on many occasions before. What she was saying is, this is a wedding that I choose not to participate in. Shouldn't someone have the basic right to say no?
Yeah, I think it just goes, Michael, I think it goes back to who gets to discriminate. And where would it stop? What if it was a Jewish wedding? Okay, no, bear with me. And the florist said, I don't want to participate in that kind of religious system.
I would find another florist happily.
Yeah, okay. But once we set that kind of precedence, where will it end? And I think,
with them going out of business. Because everybody will find another florist. That's where it'll end.
No, that's all cute. That's all cute.
That's not cute. That's real. The lunch counter protests the lunch counter protests that are so famous in the civil rights movement occurred as a voluntary boycott in the early 60s, long before the civil rights movement, and it integrated. They integrated the business because of that. Capitalism discriminates against no color, no creed, and no sexuality. They want the cash.
Integration was done by force.
Yeah.
Against state government.
Most whites did not want to feed
you live a very comfortable life. If you're going to talk about civil rights, let's talk about what happened for people trying to get served.
Let's make sure we're hearing
against
one
state
just
governments
second,
that were
Ben.
compelling segregation.
One second, Ben. Let's make sure we're hearing each other. What was it that, Ben, you concluded with? It was
Woolworths that was voluntarily.
It was state governments.
What I was saying there is that state governments were the source of segregation in the first place. People who think that Jim Crow was a voluntary system in which people just decided that they wanted to segregate their businesses are incorrect. There were Jim Crow laws on the books. The law in the state of Alabama is that you needed a 7-foot-high wall in your restaurant. Okay, this idea that the government always has clean hands and that it's individuals who are the problem, and that capitalism, in the absence of government compulsion, is not the solution to discrimination, must have missed the last 50-odd years of history in this country.
Let's have the Reverend. You had something.
I think Ben, the enormous inequality in our economic system is in part because of your divine term, freedom, and to think that. Okay, hey, bear with me. To think that freedom is always the answer. It's always the answer, isn't it?
Hold up. I would like to.
History, folks.
Why do you believe that government compulsion is always the answer? Read history.
You turn. Okay, Ben. This is great. I should use your trick because government is always the problem. It is always the problem.
Pretty much.
Frankly, friend, Jefferson created the possibility of a constitution that allowed for your religious liberties. That is not the problem.
My religious liberties, and the founders believe this, were secured by the government
was created
on behalf of
for
God.
the sake of your freedom.
It was
Your
created for the sake
freedom.
of my freedom, but it doesn't
And
get to curtail my
a
freedom.
government guarantees it, and if we don't have policemen, firemen, it would be chaos.
Of course that's true, but the minute that the government infringes on my freedom, it becomes irrelevant and it becomes unconstitutional. And this is, Jefferson didn't just institute a government; he rebelled against one.
We're talking about religious freedom specifically, and from where I sit, what I see is that what we have is an increasing fusion of religion and state, and that when we look back through human history, what that inevitably, and it's a normal thing that religions, especially religions that make exclusive truth claims, inevitably seek to use the arm of the state to control religious liberties. So if you look at Washington State, for example, and we have in this state now 45% of our healthcare system, and at some level is under the control of the Catholic bishops. There are only 20% of Washington residents who are Catholic. So what we have is, and these are public accommodations. Only 5% of the money that actually flows through them comes from Catholic coffers. It's mostly insurance funds and public funds of a variety of sorts. And what we have is because of these hospital mergers, such that are putting Catholic healthcare corporations at the top of secular institutions. For example, in southern Washington, after we passed the Death with Dignity Act in this state, which is a profoundly libertarian thing to do, there were 7 providers just north of Portland who were willing, 7 doctors who were willing to provide consultation to patients who wanted to decide how to manage their dying process on their own. They wanted control over their own pain. They wanted the ability to call it quits when they needed to, if they needed to. And after Franciscan took over that system, I believe it was Franciscan, there are several major Catholic corporations in this state, they implemented language that did not allow the religious and conscience freedom of either those providers or patients. There was one of the patients in that system who repeatedly asked for consultation about the Death with Dignity process, but the Catholic corporation language forbids even a discussion of that, and eventually that patient shot himself in his bathtub. He had the right to do that.
If you're not on the panel, don't ask a question yet. Go ahead.
The question is, at what, there's a clear, it was his own, who decides whose spiritual values matter in the decisions that we make, think of as the most sacred decisions we can make, when to bring a life into the world and when and how to leave it.
Valerie, honestly, I want to understand, because I think you're saying something that I would perceive as very extreme, and you don't strike me as in any way an extreme person. Are you suggesting that a physician who, as a matter of conscience, would say that he or she does not want to perform abortions should be compelled to perform abortions as a condition of holding a medical license? I understand, but abortions should be an even easier issue for you. I mean, but if you want to talk about death with dignity, talk about that. Let us say, are you suggesting that an individual doctor who says
there has never, those safeguards have been in place since the 1970s. There is no compulsion about performing abortion. What I'm talking about is a religiously subject healthcare corporation that has a gag order in place that prevents a physician from fulfilling what they may experience as their spiritual obligation to their patients to provide information.
Let me just understand the distinction here. You agree that an individual physician should have the right to refuse, but that a religious hospital should not have the right to refuse? That there's something about the nature of a Catholic hospital, when it incorporates as a Catholic hospital, as a religious organization, there they should be compelled to do things that the individual doctors may not choose to do.
Catholic healthcare corporations get all kinds of concessions. They are essentially monopolies in large tracts of this country. And corporations, when people incorporate, they incorporate because there are certain privileges that go with incorporation, and one could argue that there are also privileges that are given up with the process of incorporation. So I think we're talking about a very different situation than a provider saying it violates my conscience to perform an abortion versus a corporation saying to a doctor, you are not even allowed to talk about the fact that there are other medical
If, as a condition
options.
of working,
Let me
would this
move
come
us-
as a surprise to any doctors working for a Catholic hospital?
But there have been mergers.
Do you understand that 45% of the
changing. The
hospitals
rules
in
are
this
changing.
in this state
Let me
are
move
managed?
us along. I'm sorry, we're short on time, so we have to keep moving. Arlene's Flowers was next, but Michael jumped ahead on that one. So we will move forward. Reverend Corsaro, your church, Rainier Beach United Methodist Church, chartered a Boy Scout troop within your congregation and named an Eagle Scout, Jeff McGrath, as troop leader. Mr. McGrath was kicked out of the Boy Scouts organization for speaking openly of his sexuality. As you wrote in Time magazine, you and your congregation believe that asking someone not to be open about their lives and sexuality when asked is not morally straight, as the Boy Scouts profess to strive for. Do you feel the religious liberty of Mr. McGrath was violated?
The religious liberty of our United Methodist Church was violated. This is our belief. We
Can you speak a little more into the microphone?
Oh, a little more in the
There we
microphone.
go,
Sorry. Our belief as a congregation is we're open and affirming to all people, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered, even straight, and all are welcome. I'd even welcome Jim Wellman, middle-aged bald guy. I mean, that's how open we are, and Jeffrey, and so yes. I do believe our religious liberty was violated. There's an interesting relationship now that religious communities have with the Boy Scouts. When we sign up with the Boy Scouts, we are given full responsibility of the adults that are under us, partly because of bad behaviors in the past. So I, as the church, representing the church, we took full responsibility for the adults who are with our young people. And we have very strict rules. You always have 2 adults. You always have a view in another room. Jeffrey's an MSW, has a dedication. And so there's also a tenet in the Boy Scout understanding, at number 12, that they are a non-sectarian group and respect the religious beliefs of the organization they charter with. Oh, I'm not supposed to? Yes.
Ben, do you agree that the religious liberties of Mr. McGrath were violated, or that?
I just have one question. By whom?
The Boy Scouts.
Okay, so in other words, just to make sure I'm getting this, your position on this is that you have the right to volunteer into a relationship with them, but they have no right to volunteer out of a relationship with you.
In a partnership, in consensual partnerships that I'm in anyway, we have a conversation about the contract. I signed a lot of papers. We are in contract together.
Were you
So we
unaware
could
that
break up-
that they had a position like this about gay Boy Scout leaders? Were you really unaware of that?
Were they
Really?
unaware of our policy? Evidently they were, because they signed us up.
Correct. They were unaware and you weren't. So that means
So-
they got out of the contract. You can't form a contract based on non-mutual consent. Done.
Let's go back to religious liberty.
Let me add something to this. At Eastside Catholic, Principal Mark Zamuto served as a Eucharistic minister, a lay reader for Mass, was known to be gay by the school administration, but also agreed to have his public life reflect, quote, the values and the teachings of the Catholic Church. He had a same-sex wedding in November of 2012 and was fired after refusing to obtain a divorce. By all accounts, he was doing very well at his job. Massive student protests on his behalf illustrate he was a beloved educator. Was his firing an exercise of religious liberty going too far?
David, I want to, and Ben, I want to make a clarification in Jeffrey's firing and our de-chartering on Good Friday. We thought that was kind of funny. It's not that he was gay, it's that he talked about it.
Yeah, I
And
did.
this
I
is
did
the
say that
same
he was
thing.
open about talking about his
And this
sexuality.
is the
right?
same issue with the principal. The school didn't have a problem with him being there. It's when he got married and he told about it. And I ask all of us, this is the point I want us to really think about. We have gay people amongst us. And as one bishop said one time, he said, you know, we just knew them as the school teachers up the hill. The point being, we used to not talk about it. We used to, you know, it was that open secret in our small town. It was that, oh, it's the choir director, right? That's a big one in churchy world. But now what's happening is people are wanting to tell their full story. And the Boy Scouts said that's where we have a problem, that he was being honest about his family life. And I hope we're not asking people to be dishonest about who they are and who they love. We were not when we filled out the paperwork. And all the feedback we're getting is, look, you knew it's a don't ask, don't tell policy. And I can tell you from experience within the United Methodist Church that don't ask, don't tell is very harmful to the whole being. And we've been talking a lot about religious freedom, religious people, and I think of the whole person all the time. I'm working with the whole person all the time. I'm not just a talk show host. I actually am at the nursing home. I'm actually in the home of a family that's
Ouch.
mourning the lost somebody. So I'm not just a professor that gets to yell at students. I feel the real pain. It's not esoteric for me. This is real life.
I can assure you that even talk show hosts deal with loss and grief. Dr. Wellman,
This is a great issue.
you actually write about a different
I
world.
don't want to talk about that.
Different worldview.
No, I want to talk
we're not
about
changing the topic here. It's related. You write about different mutually exclusive worldviews. Would you agree with the Reverend there that those religious liberties are violated, or is it a case of you have two conflicting private parties, not a government interference, but a private party, and that kind of exclusion is inevitable in competing theologies?
No, yeah, that's interesting. But just to get to this concrete case, the Eastlake Catholic, I think they had the right to fire him, just on the facts. And I reread the facts. He, to some extent, covered up what he had done. I'm not against it. I am a proud Presbyterian USA who just made a decision that their clergy in states where gay marriage is legal can perform gay marriage. And so, yeah, I will. But in this case, I thought they had the right to do that. Do I agree with it? No, I don't. But that was unfortunate. He sounds like a great guy. I think this will go against the younger Catholics, and it's a bad mark for the young Catholics. They'll look at this case and go, oh, this is crazy. So I don't think it's a good thing for the Catholic Church in general. But I think it was rightly decided. I don't think he has a case. I don't think he has a case. So.
I'm not arguing. I don't care. No, but I do on the point of what I do know about both these cases is that the system they were in was, we know from the Thunderburg district that we're part of with the Boy Scouts, and I know from Eastside Catholic, just chatting with some folks, that everybody knew who these guys were. It's that when they were public about it, and like religious liberty, being able to talk freely on the radio, isn't that what we're about? And so,
yes, but there are consequences about anything you say, particularly something you say publicly. And the idea of freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from consequences. And I would imagine that if you had an employee, let's say you had an associate pastor at your church, and I don't know if you do, or you had a minister of music, or you had somebody else who was teaching kids, And he all of a sudden had an epiphany and had a religious awakening. And he got up one day in church and he said, you know, Monica, I think you and the rest of the people here are all going straight to hell because you're not really saved and your doctrine is wrong here and your doctrine is wrong there. Would you have a right to fire his rear end? You bet! And I would expect that you would. Because basically, yes, you can talk, and maybe he had that in his heart for a long time and he didn't want to talk about it. Good, that's fine. But as soon as you start talking against the doctrine of an institution, particularly a religious institution, with which you are affiliated, then of course there are going to be consequences. This is another one, David, and this, pardon me, I don't mean to hijack this in one direction. But
what?
Yeah, no hijacking. But a long time ago, when my wife and I still lived in Los Angeles, there was a very, very infamous case where there was a rabbi who had gone through a divorce, and this was at a conservative synagogue, not an Orthodox synagogue. And he announced to the congregation that he didn't want to hide anymore. He was living with his girlfriend out of wedlock. There was a long, tortured debate, and the board fired him. I am sure they would not do that today. Don't you think that a religious institution has a very strong basis for imposing that kind of rule on behavior, on practice of religion, if what you are doing is in violation of the kind of practice that you're trying to encourage?
Yes, if there's not the wink wink. In both these cases, there was the wink wink. We're glad we have you here. You're our best vice principal ever. Oh, but you got married and now you're telling people about it. They knew he was that's what he's going to argue on.
Reverend, I'd like to get a clarification from you. Are you saying that it's morally wrong for these things to have happened, but not asking for government compulsion, or are you arguing for government compulsion in addition to saying that these firings were morally wrong?
Oh, no, well, Eastside Catholic, it's Catholic school, Catholic doctrine, I understand, yes, it's their right. I agree with Jim. but except for he was okay, he was okay as long as he was sort of in their closet. That's what I have a problem with. They were willing to break their own rules as long as he was quiet about it.
But on that one, you're not arguing for government compulsion. You're just saying, okay.
No.
What about the Boy Scout case in your case?
Boy Scout case, well, Boy Scout's different because the Boy Scouts, again, what's their theological statement? What's their, how many times do they worship a week? How many, again, they're not I'm the church. I'm the religious institution. I don't need the government to get in on this, except that the Boy Scouts have this very interesting relationship with the government and elected officials, and there's a really strong relationship.
The except kind of overrides the rest of the statement. I mean, are you arguing for government compulsion for the Boy Scouts?
No.
I will argue for government compulsion broadly.
I didn't hear you. Are you for government compulsion in both circumstances?
So let me tell you what I'm trying to say. In every case that we've talked about tonight, there's some kind of tension between either the religious freedom, the spiritual freedom of two individuals, or between the spiritual freedom of an individual and an institution. And what we've heard from every single panelist is situations that are either ridiculous or anguishing at some level because of those conflicts. And so what we have if we just simply say religious freedom is absolute, that's the biggest kind of moral relativism that you could possibly imagine. There is no way to come together and create a civil society of the kind that we have in this country that is unique in the world.
Valerie, I don't think anyone is saying that. For one, let me give you one example where I imagine everyone in this room would agree, which is right now there are some Muslims, not most, but some Muslims in the United States who believe they have a religious right and, in fact, a religious duty to mutilate their little girls.
Michael, you have this habit of jumping ahead on totally different topics.
Sorry, but
wait, hold that thought for a moment and allow me to interject with
rather not
something
hold that
else
thought,
here.
actually.
Release that thought for a long moment, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Would you apply, Valerie, that the same idea of government compulsion to, say, the patriarch of Duck Dynasty when he was shelved by A&E, did that organization, the television network, violate his religious freedom then in shelving him because of controversial religious statements that he made? Would it apply there where you would have government step in and say, no, he was expressing his faith in the public sphere?
Did his religious freedom get violated? I think it probably at some level did, but what I'm trying to say is that's the problem here, that our deepest spiritual values put us into conflict with each other. And
sure, but that's why I was asking about there's a difference between compulsion and conflict. That's what I was trying to get to.
But it's the job of government, it's the job of civil society and our elected officials to navigate some really messy kind of dynamic tension between those things that allow us to live in community together. And is it going to look ridiculous sometimes? Is it going to be painful sometimes? Is somebody going to get trampled on in a way that makes us all shudder? Absolutely. Is there any alternative? The alternative is the kind of moral relativism that comes from having religion, extreme religious freedom that simply trumps civil society, and or the kind of theocracy that they have in the Middle East that trumps religious liberty altogether.
Jump on in there.
Yeah, I think I have a way to kind of clarify this. I think one of the problems is our religious freedom is bought by the government for us. That is, we are nonprofits and given breaks. And therefore, the government, to some extent, has the right to regulate. Now, I would say, and I have said this to churches, if you want to speak the truth to power, that is to our government, and I did during the Iraq War, then stop being a nonprofit. Pull your own weight, right? Then you have, I think, the kind of religious freedom that we're calling for, and not compulsed,
Doesn't the same logic hold for a business license, though? I mean, because churches operate under LLCs and Incs all the time.
That'd be interesting. But what I'm saying to you, I think it's.
No, I appreciate your point. I'm just saying it's broad.
I'm trying to get at a solution here because I think we are tied to the government because we are given a nonprofit status, and therefore, to some extent, we're under their compulsion.
And what I'm saying is, it may be too broad.
Both good and bad. It's both good and bad because, I'm arguing both sides of this statement.
Well, you're a professor, you're allowed.
Yeah, well, come on. But seriously, I think this is a difficult argument, a difficult situation.
I have to challenge you because you keep talking about government as this external entity. I mean, at its best, government is what Abraham Lincoln said it was, which is the way we come together to do things that we can't very well do alone. I mean, we struggle with that in this country, and most of us feel like our government has an unacceptable level of corruption. Most of us feel like there are things that our elected representatives do that are not, frankly, nauseating. But the reality is that is what we're after. And so, like, when we talk about imposing some kind of compulsion that allows us to create civil society, like, it's us doing it.
I think Michael would agree with me on this. The government is sometimes the problem.
Well,
let's be honest about that.
You're arguing for the tyranny of the majority. That's what it is. I mean, if the essence is that anything the government does is legitimate because we voted for that government, then anything the government does is legitimate, including encroaching on the rights of minorities across the board. This is very problematic. Michael, I think the point that you were making before is a really important one. So I want to get back to, if you can, the what the limits are in terms of religious freedom, because of course everybody agrees that the government has a space in regulating certain things that would presumably violate some religious freedoms.
Right. No, of course they do. But I actually find myself in at least partial agreement with what James is saying here about disentangling faith from government as much as we possibly can. Yeah. And part of what that means, and it's something that troubles me a great deal, as many things do, about the current tax system, is that when you allow certain contributions to be tax deductible and others not to be tax deductible, and the government makes that decision, the government is saying, we believe that certain institutions and certain causes are more worthy than others. That's the whole essence of this IRS mess that we're in right now. And I actually would prefer that the government does not have that power. And what that probably means is that you give people some kind of standard deduction that they can use for charitable contributions, but that the government shouldn't be determining that if you want to give to charity X. By the way, I think that the NRA actually is tax deductible right now. And the fact that the NRA is tax deductible and the Sierra Club is tax deductible, but the Democratic Party is not and the Republican Party is not, that seems to me completely nonsensical. It's political speech, it's political action. Either treat it the same or don't. And I don't want some bureaucrat, certainly no one working for the Internal Revenue Service, going over, oh yes, well this is good, yes, we'll give you credit for this, but no, this is too political. That's outrageous to me.
Let me move forward, Michael, to something that you brought a little earlier, and because I want to get to at least two more topics before we run out of time. I'm going to give a few examples, and we can do a roundtable on all of these examples. Last year, North Carolina became the 7th state to prohibit state judges from considering Islamic law, Sharia, in family cases, and Alabama is supposed to have a similar measure on the ballot this year. In Oklahoma, the measure was struck down as unconstitutional. Are these laws an assault on religious liberty from the right?
Absolutely.
Hold on, I've got 3 examples. Let me get them all out there. In France.
Yay, Michael.
In France, burqas have been banned as oppressive to women and against the open culture of France. Would such a ban be warranted here? And finally, last March, NBC reported female genital mutilation is on the rise in the United States, and the CDC reports that up to 200,000 girls are at risk in the United States. Is this a religious liberty issue?
Okay, I do believe that saying that you cannot consult Sharia law is a clear constitutional violation. It's prima facie constitutional violation. It's singling out one form of religious law among all of them and saying you can't consider that one. If you want to say that judges can consider no religious doctrines or no religious laws, well, okay, maybe. But certainly not picking out one religious law. Concerning burqa bans, I can think of there are all kinds of clothing that I personally would like to see banned. However, you know, look, we live in Seattle. I mean, really, we live in America. Let 1,000 flowers bloom. I don't think anyone is threatened by seeing someone walking around in a black bag. Let them. And third, when it comes to genital mutilation, yes, we do have a right to protect little girls from permanent damage by their parents. And I believe that there's a whole, Ben would know more, but there is a whole range of jurisprudence that says, no, you don't, I mean, if God forbid you have a religious obligation in your own warped faith to commit human sacrifice, sorry, you can't do it. By the way, we ban animal sacrifice too. And I also think that's appropriate. Most states, I don't know about the state of Washington, I know in the state of Florida, it's been a big issue for the Santarists who want to go around sacrificing goats and chickens. Now, this probably is not a very popular religion with PETA, but on this one, I think they have a point.
I mean, I agree with Michael's breakdown. I think that the problem that we're seeing here is that issues that are really at the margins of society, right? Issues that I think that everybody can agree with are now being lumped in with all religious issues. So in other words, people are saying, okay, well, you can legitimately ban with government the clitorectomies of baby girls. You can legitimately ban that. Well, that means that you can also ban a church from not performing a gay marriage. You can now leverage. These are not the same thing. And using the argument at the margin to say that broad legislation across everything is okay is hugely mistaken and a dramatic misunderstanding of the role of government. But we see this all the time. And these sorts of arguments, the argument from the margin to now apply to everything is probably the most dangerous thing that you can do when you're creating public policy.
But Ben, that's what you've been doing. That's what you've been doing all evening, is talking at the margins about cases that make us cringe, and that's what we've been doing too. And
I don't think it's at the margins to talk about gay marriage, which is a central focus of what is going on in this country on social issues, or abortion, which has been a central focus for the last 40 years on what's going on. I don't think that's anywhere near the neighborhood of child sacrifice, for example.
But I'm saying in a different way, it's at the margins. to talk
Headlines
about
are going to
the
say,
flower shop,
Shapiro
right?
says gay marriage not equal to child sacrifice.
Breaking.
It's going to be your people.
Let me shift gears here, unless any of you would like to add to that. In 1976, my sister played the Virgin Mary in our Christmas pageant. I played a reindeer.
Which one?
I was one of the boring ones, unfortunately. It was a long-time tradition to have those kinds of pageants at our school in Stanwood, Washington, and at schools around the country. Now schools don't even call it Christmas vacation. They don't recognize Easter. They shy away from any religious references. Is this evidence of growing restrictions on religious liberty, or do they reflect a growing recognition of diversity within our culture? In Texas and Florida, kids have had Bibles and other religious books they've brought from home for reading time taken away from them as inappropriate. And this kind of incident seems to be becoming more common in the press. Do those incidents reflect on a larger pattern of cultural intolerance of religion, or are they the isolated actions of individuals?
You know, I think this is really complicated. One of the problems, or one of the reasons that the younger generation has disaffiliated from religious organizations is that they feel, and you're right, they still pray and they believe in God, but the reason is that they found that religion has become too politicized. And that really is the chief reason. And so it's a problem. And with my students in particular, they hate it when somebody gets up in class and begins to witness to their faith. Okay?
Have I shared with you the good news?
Wait. If I don't cut that off, 10, 20 students will come up to me and say, "Teacher, Professor, that is just wrong. I won't stand for that." So but the other side of this is that there is a sense at the University of Washington, I just wrote about this on my blog, is that religiously conservative students are often sort of name called, in sort of an offhanded way by professors. And there's a sense in which it's okay.
Professor Wellman, you're doing a medved and jumping ahead to the next topic here. Let's refocus on the elementary schools.
Well,
that was pretty interesting, though.
It is. That's why we're coming back to it.
Did you hear how messed up his pageant was? There was a reindeer and the Virgin Mary.
We didn't have a lobster like.
I was kind of getting to the point that the dominance of Christianity in these public settings is a problem. And if we're going to have religious liberty, let's as Michael said, let's let 1,000 flowers, what's the word? Bloom. And let's have multiple religious parties and whatnot. I think that's much better than sort of becoming nude of religion in our schools, which is a terrible cultural, destruction.
Well said. Amen.
Thank you.
I mean, I'm sure that Michael, you went to public school, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so did I for elementary school, and I think I was in the Christmas pageant. I believe I was an elf, and somehow I didn't magically turn into a Christian. And my guess is that both you and I could probably sing in beautiful two-part harmony all of Silent Night, probably based on what we learned in public school. The idea that this is some sort of grand imposition or grand inquisition, and that the acting out of the mere saying of the word Christmas in a public school is somehow an establishment of religion to the exclusion of all other religions. Before you warned that perhaps I should take things a little more lightly. On this one, I do take it pretty lightly.
Good.
The idea that
I'm proud of you, man.
The idea that religion is being imposed on me by a public school when there is a Christmas pageant I can opt in or out of is if this is as bad as it gets, then I'm willing to live with that.
Yeah, I grew up as I was one of only 3 Jewish children in my elementary school and the only Jewish child in my grade. And for the Christmas pageant, very regularly they had me say, we celebrate Christmas around the world like this. And then I'd say, and in Israel, we don't celebrate Christmas, we celebrate Hanukkah. And that was okay, it built character. to go through talking about that, and I think there is something useful to being able to stand out from the crowd and somehow man up and take it. And however, the one thing that I will not forgive, is so many of these multicultural pageants. They have these wonderful Christmas carols that are some of the best music in the whole world. And then we have, I had a little dreidel, I made it out of clay. I mean, you know, the Christians are singing about the Savior of the world, and we're singing about a spinning top. This is not fair. This is not good.
Michael, we have Bizet and we have Gershwin, but we don't have Beethoven or Brahms. We're gonna have to let it go.
Gershwin. The only depth I want to bring to this part of the conversation is I wish we practiced more. If everyone's going to sing those Christmas and Advent tunes, then know a little something about them. And I'm just saying that to those who practice. But I think about the trouble that your conservative students are getting at UW. I just want to lift up that any of you in the audience that practice a religion, I'm proud of you, because it's very hard in this part of the world to practice and be taken seriously, because there's so much institutional anguish that's put on our shoulders, and it's hard work to say, no, I actually practice, and I actually know what that Silent Night song is about. And so I'm not gonna worry too much about singing Frosty or Not, because that's secular. See, there's a difference on some of these. But I wish that those of us that get this rancor for being a practicing person, I wish we all took a little more time to know what we were about. And what I know about at least our two religions that are up here is you love God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the beginning tenets of both of our traditions. And so that's where I try to start.
And that's a nice segue back to Professor Wellman's blog, which, by the way, this column is linked at KTTH.com if you're looking for it. In a recent column, Professor Wellman, you wrote that discrimination against conservative religious beliefs are the last acceptable prejudice on college campuses. And you urged universities to take steps to make these students more comfortable. What kinds of religious hostility do you see on campus? What kinds of steps would you recommend universities take? And how does the failure to address this impact ethnic minority students? And how did the situation come about?
Wow.
Well, I think, there
In
is
30 seconds
there
or
is
less.
such, Michael said we're not secular, but I think there is there is some secularization within American culture, and a part of that, and a lot of us want to say that higher education is the problem. I'm not quite sure that's true, but in general, I think at the higher education level, there is a great resistance to conservative religion. I mean, that's just, I think, a given, and to some extent, even from my perspective, I think critique is really important. But critique of liberal Protestantism, liberal Judaism, liberal Catholicism is appropriate as well. Critique across the board. And critique must be fair, even-handed, not name-calling. I think the biggest thing is name-calling, is fundamentalism is used kind of as a hammer, that anyone's conservative, you're a fundamentalist, which means you're a superstitious idiot. In my experience with conservative religious folks is that they're some of our best students, bar none. So, so I think that's a real deal, and I think, to be honest, I guess I'm taking credit. I think our international studies program kind of woke up. They saw my article and they said, I think you're right, man.
Can I throw something else in? And this is something, we have two children, one who is going to be graduating from the University of Washington and one who is now in a master's program and graduated undergraduate from UW some years ago. And for both of those children, it was occasionally a problem because we're religious. We observe a lot of holidays that seem very weird to the world at large and that most people don't know about. And I would say in 95% of the time, faculty, especially when you have a conflict with a final exam, with a religious holiday like Shavuot, and what is Shavuot? People don't know. It's actually one of the major Jewish holidays. It's one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals. It's important. And what was surprising to me was those very rare occasions where you would run into an uncooperative faculty member. Unbelievable to me that were willing to punish the academic consequences of taking off a religious holiday. That, it seems to me, university-wide, ought to not be tolerated.
Yep.
I agree with you.
Yep.
I want to say this. I've got 5 things before we bring this evening to a close. One, I hope those of you who submitted questions noted how they were tied in to the topics brought up on stage. I also want to thank the audience for being spirited but civil and excited for both sides. Proof that we can have civil conversations and actually hear one another. And I also want to have a special round of applause for our left wing, or at least closer to the left guests here, Dr. Wellman, a little nod toward you, for coming into what's perceived to be hostile territory. Thank you so much for being our guest tonight. And, of course, for our cultural crusader and battling Ben Shapiro for being here and being very tired.